The honourable member for Western Arctic.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to rise here to debate this particular bill, although by and large the subject and the direction that the government has chosen to take it with this bill is completely at odds with our party's policies. We don't support these mandatory minimum sentences for drug offenses, and this amendment that we're talking about today would, of course, eliminate those from this bill. But as well, this bill in front of us, taking up the time of Parliament in the discussion of drug policy, is really indicative of this government, where we see this government put forward legislation not to deal with the problems of drug policy, but simply to put a sugar coating on their anti-crime agenda to mollify their constituents who somehow could believe that they're doing something useful for Canadian society with this bill. And that, Mr. Speaker, is the problem that we face today. We in this Parliament are not dealing with the real issues that are in front of us in this country. When we put forward legislation like this, we are simply putting forward a public relations effort. A public relations effort to convince Canadians prior to the next time we go to the polls that this government is actually engaged in serious work for Canadians on the justice side. Mr. Speaker, drug use in Canada remains at a level that it has for many years. It represents, in many cases, the appetite of Canadians, the direction that Canadians take with their life. Mr. Speaker, I live in a northern region where the problems that we have with substance abuse primarily come from alcohol. We have worked with those issues for centuries. We seem sometimes to get closer to the solutions. The solutions don't come with enforcement. The solutions to the alcohol issues in the Northwest Territories and Northern Canada and across this country don't come from putting people in jail. The solutions to alcohol abuse, the misuse of the substance, which most Canadians enjoy, don't mind taking a drink occasionally, find it useful, perhaps even a little healthful to them, in many cases are the prime cause of misery, broken families, property damage, you name it. But we don't try to deal with alcohol abuse, the problems of alcohol, by simply putting people in jail. We know that that's not a solution. We know that we need to come up with better solutions. We know that the solutions that are going to work are based on understanding, on education, on working with people to ensure that they have decent income and that they have the opportunities that come with life. So what we see here is a bill that speaks to trafficking. I agree. This is a bill about those that traffic in the drugs that Canadians buy, that Canadians use. So what we're doing here with this bill, if it was passed and it's in the state that it's in now, will likely increase the value of drugs on the street, will likely make it more profitable for some to purvey the drugs, but will it actually come to grips with drug issues in our communities? No, I think actually it'll go the other way. It will increase the problems we have because we haven't taken positive steps towards solving these problems. We've chosen to go in the wrong direction. And that is really unfortunate, Mr. Speaker. That is something that takes up our time, that sets this country in a course that in a number of years will have to change, go back in another direction. And, so when we stand here today and put forward an amendment to try to change this bill, even somewhat, so that we try to make the government recognize and make all of Parliament recognize that these are the wrong directions. We're interested in working in the right directions on drug policy in this country. And what are those right directions? Likely, for 80% of the illegal drugs sold in this country, those being cannabis, for 80% of the value of illegal substance in this country, will likely want to move to a decriminalization mode. That's our party's position and has been for many years. Why is that position? Well, that position's been backed up by every study, by every independent commission that has been put forward on the subject in Canada. Mr. Speaker, we came to realize that some drugs actually people might use them for their own personal health reasons. And the government years ago put forward and had to come forward with a medical marijuana ordinance. Not working very well. The statistics are quite interesting. Of the 400,000 people in this country that likely use marijuana for health reasons, about 3,000 of them are licensed under the government program. So less than 1%. Less than 1% is under that program that the government set up. Complete failure. So the other 99% of those people that might use marijuana for medical purposes are out on the streets buying them from the dealers that are going to be impacted by this law. They're going to be raising the price. They're going to make it more criminal. So those people are going to be put in even a worse situation than they are today. Mr. Speaker, interestingly enough, when you look at the Drug Strategy and Control Substance Program and the medical marijuana cost breakdown, for those 3,000 licensed users, we spent $5.2 million in 2006 and 07, supplying 3,000 people with their medical marijuana. Mr. Speaker, that's outrageous. But it shows the incredible ineptitude of this Parliament and this government and the government previous in actually coming to grips with the issues of drug policy, drug use in this country. So here we are today, battling over whether we should put the traffickers in jail for longer periods of time when we can't face up to the reality of what people in this country do, Canadians do, for medical use, for recreational use, or for addictive reasons. We can't come to grips with that. Isn't that an incredible failure on the part of our government, on the part of our society in this day and age? Mr. Speaker, I don't know how much longer I have here to speak on this subject. I don't know how much longer I want to lecture the government on its failures and on the failures of this House of Commons. But I would like to say, can we please, in this country, move forward in a sensible and rational fashion on drug policy, put the ideology aside, recognize what's important for Canadians, read the statistics, listen to what the experts are saying, come back to us with something that resembles a useful tool for Canadians for the future. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'll leave my comments there.
Questions and comments. Questions and commentary. The Honourable Member for Nanaimo, Cowichan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the member from Western Arctic for his eloquent speech. And I know he touched a little on this, and I'd like him to expand on it. He's from an area where there are remote communities, and I suspect it's like it is on Vancouver Island and in my own riding of Nanaimo, Cowichan, where it's often very difficult to have a balanced approach. And what we've seen with what's happening with the Conservative government is what they do is they look at one aspect when we're talking about drugs and fail to look at things like prevention, which entails education and awareness, and certainly treatment. And I know that, for example, many young people in my own riding have a lot of difficulty in accessing treatment when they're ready to take treatment on. And I wonder if the member could comment on what he sees as being important in terms of a more balanced approach when we're talking about drugs in this country.
The honourable member for Western Arctic.
Well, Mr. Speaker, because of the sense of illegality around drug use, because of the kinds of relationships that people get into when they're drug users, because of course these are illegal substances, they're forced into the criminal market. Because of all those things, young people become and take on the air of those around them. So in one respect, this government's right. There is gateway into drugs, and that gateway is the criminalization of drugs. That's what in so many cases, and proven by the statistics, is driving the development of many of the drugs that are used in this country. Mr. Speaker, I honestly say we need to come back to basics here. We need to understand what has to happen in this country. Without that understanding, with this continued ideological presentation of issues on this particular subject, we are going to suffer Canadians, suffer the young people that you're talking about in the future, and we are just simply doing them an incredible disservice.
Questions and comments. The Honourable the Minister of Western Diversification.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I listened to the member, and I want to ask the member if he thinks that marijuana is not a drug that should be criminalized, that should be decriminalized. What he thinks when there are RCMP or Operational Intelligence, the superintendent from Centre Surrey said, what can't be debated is that cannabis is a currency for organized crime. And when I did tour of my riding, when we were talking and debating about marijuana and about the dangers of marijuana, there was a concern in the school districts that the drug dealers would definitely lace marijuana with drugs that would be dangerous to the young people. I wonder if he has thought past of the serious drug crimes that this legislation is trying to address. He seems to not realize that we're talking about serious crimes, not about anything less than production, trafficking, possession for the purpose of trafficking, importing, exporting, possession for the purpose of exporting. Wouldn't he think that it's important to protect his constituents from those serious offences?
The Honourable Member for Western Arctic.
Well, I think, Mr. Speaker, actually the Minister actually makes the point that I was trying to make. The criminalization of drugs that are used by such a large percentage of the population, some for medical purposes, some for recreational purposes, is driving the criminal industry in this country. 80% of the revenues of organized crime for drugs come from marijuana. That is a terrible statistic. That's the oxygen that drives the criminal industry in her province, in my territory. We need to take that away. Decriminalization is the first step in doing that. I personally believe that we won't get a reduction in crime until we legalize marijuana. We can look at the other drugs. I'm not sure about those. I'm willing to call it on that. But when the Minister speaks as she does, she's making my case.